Okay, I will be presenting a project that has been funded by Understanding Society as their Understanding Society Fellow on digital device usage and also parenting and as well-being or socio-emotional health of adolescents in the UK. Okay. So a lot of people are studying this topic now, but as a social demographer, which I would call myself a social demographer or family demographer, we're interested in looking at relationships either from a society, sort of individuals as a member of society or as member of subgroups or as members of their own family related to their self. And as you know, there's only a few of us here today, but there are more people studying this topic. And I decided to focus on ethnic group differences in the UK. So a lot of times we study ethnic group differences sort of in a way of looking at it as more of a social equality thing to look at social cohesion. A lot of times they also serve as interesting, sort of almost natural experiment to see how different people, when they're embedded in different family systems and different sort of parenting norms, how digital device usage might be linked to their socio-emotional health could vary. So this is, I find it to be an opportunity to do so. And of course, when we talk about youth well-being and digital device usage, a lot of studies have already looked at sleep patterns, online safety, and also children or adolescents' attention span. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on mental health. And I don't do anything clinical or collect any data myself, so I will be looking at the strengths and difficulties questionnaire. And I'm really excited to see Tom's study later on psychiatric diagnosis. I think that would give a different and deeper insight as well. Okay, so for the agenda today, I'll talk a little bit on motivation on the topic, what's been done, what I've done, and a little bit of discussion. So many of you have already know that if we look at children, let's say 8 to 9 years old, their sort of contact with social media or video sharing services are already near universal, and they spend on average of 2 hours on let's say social media per day. And boys and girls at this stage spend about the same amount of time online. But when you fast forward to 13 to 40 years old, you see that they spend 4 hours per weekday on social media, and girls actually spend about an hour longer on social media than boys by this stage. So we're seeing some sort of diverging patterns between boys and girls at this stage. And if you think about 4 hours on a weekday, that is for a child who's going to school, that's really a very substantial amount of their leisure time. So happiness and age has already also has long been sort of found to be a U-shaped curve. So young children tend to be happy, and then as they get into sort of middle age, happiness kind of dips a bit, probably due to sort of burdens related to life, work, and other responsibilities. And when you get a little bit older, that happiness kind of goes back up. So we're seeing that the U shape is actually changing, and that's mostly because the youth are no longer the happiest. Starting around 2013, so that inspired a lot of people, a lot of scholars to really look into the reasons why. So Blanche Flower, I think, pointed this out first, and then Jean Twenge linked it to because of the introduction or the widespread use of handheld devices starting around that point. And then more recently, Pablo Gracia in Spain have found that it has gotten worse through the years, and sort of the linkage is a little bit more severe or substantially more severe in some cases amongst lower socioeconomic status youths. So once again, why do we look at ethnic differences? Because there are very different ways individuals use digital devices. So if we look at the time people spend on a digital device, it's also hard to see what they're actually doing on it and what's their relationship with that device. In the US, there's been some studies that have pointed out that minorities, let's say from I think Indian Americans tend to use digital devices a lot for learning, whereas white children tend to use it for gaming. So usage could be different. How controlling parents are, let's say, or how much parameters they put on how children can use these devices also differ substantially across group. So if you think about sort of mental health or well-being in relation to digital device usage, there's quite a few things that ethnic minorities and majority whites in the UK differ. They could differ in parenting style. They tend to differ by geography, so they are distributed in different level of neighborhoods of different levels of deprivation. Their socioeconomic status differ on group level, and their family structure tend to differ. And in the case of South Asians versus whites, we know that South Asians are more likely to live in intact families, whereas whites are less so. Okay, so using Understanding Society, I look at all ways 2009 to 2024, and I look at mainly youth questionnaires, which are answered by 10 to 15-year-olds themselves, and then you can link their digital behavior, the strengths and difficulties, to the parents' parenting style questionnaire. So the major groups of ethnic minorities in the UK are Pakistani, Bangladeshis, Africans. I know African sounds very broad, but Understanding Societies does not break them down into smaller groups. And in fact, for the purpose of this study, because of sample size, I also group Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis together. And I've checked to see their parenting style and also digital device usage among youth. They're quite similar. So it was a reasonable merge, let's say. So the key variables we'll look at is strengths and difficulties. So this is a score from 0 to 40. I'll describe that more in a minute. Social media usage and screen time are reported by the youths in categories. Parenting styles are reported by parents, and I'll go into that further in a second too. So I did two things here that I will show. Oaxaca blinder decomposition takes a cross-sectional view, and we only use the most recent observations, which amounts to 5,000 or so white adolescents and 844 South Asians and 204 Africans. For the lag model, I want to look at sort of the time component. So I want 2 consecutive wave observations only, resulting in 6,900 or something white, 890 South Asians. I don't know why I left out Africans here, but I'll double check later. And you might say, okay, how come the consecutive wave observations are bigger than the most recent observations? Because for the Oaxaca blinder, I need more covariates, whereas the lag model, it's more difficult to look at all the covariates. Okay, so strengths and difficulties are generally divided into internal problems youth experience or external problems. Internal problems are emotional problems. So they answer to questions like, I worry a lot, I'm often unhappy, I have many fears. Peer problems are things like other people bully me, I don't seem to have friends my age. External problems are conduct problems, accused of lying, cheating, often gets very angry. Hyperactivity is easily distracted or constantly fidgeting or squirming. So a lot of past studies have found that girls are more prone to having internal problems, boys external. So in terms of parenting, there's a parenting PSDQ, which is the parenting style questionnaire. And it's basically built on 2 axes by psychologists. So on the level of demand and the level of warmth. So if someone has very low demand for their child and also gives very low warmth, that tends to be sort of dubbed uninvolved parenting, let's say. High demand, low warmth, authoritarian parenting. High warmth but very low demand, that's permissive parenting. And typically, scholars point to authoritative parenting, which is high demand but high warmth, to be more ideal. Okay, so this is just, so it's collected through an instrument called Parenting Styles and Dimensions Questionnaire, which measures these 3 items specifically: authoritativeness, authoritarianism, which is sort of the more negative, a harsh parenting, and then permissive parenting are kind of captured by questions like, I find it very difficult to discipline my child. If they kick up a fuss, I tend to give up. So both authoritarian parenting and permissive parenting have been linked to worse mental health for children. So what did I do? So I look at whether ethnic groups actually parent differently. So there's some evidence in the US. There's not a whole lot of work done in the UK. I simply looked at the analysis variance and post hoc pairwise comparison. We can see that all these groups, Indian versus white, Pakistani and Bangladeshi versus white, African versus white, they're all more authoritarian than white parents. Indians and Africans tend to be less permissive than white parents. And if you break it down, I won't show it here, but if you look at mothers and fathers, white fathers are particularly permissive and have low authority over children. Okay. And at the same time, we know that South Asian youth spend less time on social media or screens, or with screens. So the blue dot signify screen time. The brownish beige color dot is social media usage. And the categories are less than 1 hour a day, 1 to 3 hours, 4 to 6 hours, or 7+ hours. And the dotted line in the middle is to compare to white youths. So if they fall on the right-hand side of the dotted line, that means they use these things more than white youths. If they're on the left-hand side, then they use it less. So this is their odds ratio of being in a higher usage category. The lighter dots are controlling for, without parenting style controls. And then the dark ones include parenting styles. So we can see for Indians, screen time, they tend to use, it's quite clear that they use less screen than, they have less screen time than white children. And same with Bangladeshi. And if we look at social media usage, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis have lower, clearly lower social media usage than white children. Okay, so if you look at sort of the odds, they Bangladeshi and Pakistani youths are about half as likely to be in a higher screen time category than white youths. Okay, so if we just look at the distribution of SDQ, the strength and difficulty scores across time. So once again, the higher number signifies more difficulties, and 0 is they have no difficulty whatsoever. So looking from 2009 to 2023, so this is collected every other year in the odd years in Understanding Society, we can see that although the distribution tends to be right skewed, which means the right tail is longer, so most kids don't have extreme difficulties, but you can see the percentage, 75 percentile is shifting rightward. And if we just look at this distribution by ethnic minority groups, so the white is this kind of orange brown on top, and the beige color is South Asian, and the light blue is African. And we look at the median score here, we can see that the median score of white children, boys and girls, are both higher than their South Asian and African counterparts. So ethnic minority children on average actually experience fewer difficulties at least through the Understanding Society dataset. So if we look at SDQ, we treat it as a continuous variable, and you might say, okay, children are just different. Some people might be a little bit more difficult than others. Some kids are a little bit more hyper than others. So we kind of also want to look at the extreme categories, right? So in a lot of papers, they use either top 10% of difficulties or top 20%. So here I show the top 20% of social emotional difficulties is just proportion compared to white peers, and the orange brown line is white peers. And we can see if we look at the top row for boys, about over 30% of white boys report experiencing top 20% of difficulties. And compared to South Asian and Africans, they're more like 12, 18%. So that's a pretty big substantial difference. And they're statistically significant. The faded ones are not. And we can see for girls, hyperactivity as well is quite clear. and also emotional problems that Africans and South Asians report lower difficulties in this area. Okay, so here we want to decompose the differences between the white minority SDQ gap and see what contributes to their group differences. So the faded bars, once again, are not significant. And if you see the dark brown bar, they contribute to higher minority SDQ. If you look at the more orange bar, they contribute to higher white SDQ. So if we look at boys, for white versus African boys, you can see that permissive parenting contributes to higher white SDQ. And for boys, also social media usage compared to South Asians. But the most striking thing is actually number of parents in household for both boys and girls, but especially boys. So South Asians tend to live in two-parent families, and this seems to be highly linked to why white children are experiencing more difficulties. But if we look at social media usage and screen time, comparing white girls to South Asian girls, we're seeing that they're contributing a non-negligible proportion. So if we look at a lag model, which is we look at the screen time or social media usage at T-1, so let's say year to 2012, and then we look at SDQ the following year, so we have a temporal element, we can see that once again the screen time is the light blue, social media usage is the brown. For South Asians, we can see that screen time is compared to the baseline group, which is less than 1 hour per weekday, that using it more is linked to boys having a little bit more difficulties. It's not very clear for girls, but if we look at white children, the pattern is quite clear. Okay, so just to cover the 3 key findings. First is that parenting strategies do seem to be distinct among ethnic groups in the UK, that minorities, the South Asian groups and Africans, tend to be less permissive and more authoritarian, mixture in authoritativeness. Digital device habits do seem to differ across groups, with whites using digital device for longer hours than the minority groups. And they do explain a non-negligible portion of the mental health gap between whites and minorities where whites are disadvantaged. So is this generalizable in terms of migration literature? It might not be, just because of migrant selection. The individuals in the UK, such as South Asian groups, are not quite the same as, let's say, North African groups in France. But if we look at the same groups in different countries, perhaps we could uncover whether or not parenting practices are deeply rooted in culture. Okay, since the effect size is actually generally small, there's a lot of other things that matter a lot for children's childhood. Does it actually matter? I would argue that yes, because the small effect is it's pretty much universal, and it's evolving depending on the kind of content, the kind of So when I was in college, this was content, and now this is content, right? So like watching 5 hours of Strong Bad or 5 hours of Andrew Tate could be quite different for your mental health. So the conclusion is that there is no real conclusion, except that childhood is very complex, and digital device usage is a small piece of a much larger puzzle, but we should keep an eye on it. Thank you.